Joining us on The Informer to discuss some reforms, some important reforms that are likely to take place, and also we want to discuss the controversial Omnibus bill, is someone we know at The Informer and have known for quite some time. She's a family violence lived experience consultant. Her name is Cathy Oddie. Welcome once again, Cathy.
Hi, George. It's lovely to be here again.
Now, tell me, we want to talk about some reforms, and the important thing is, I understand there are well-intentioned people out there who want to help and protect the community at large, but sometimes when you go and make these adjustments and these reforms, there are unintended consequences, and some of these have reared their ugly head in the last couple of days, especially with things that you have been addressing and looking at. Can you fill us in?
Absolutely. So since we last spoke, when we were discussing the Judicial Proceedings Reforms Act, there's been quite significant consultation with a range of victim survivor advocacy groups. Now, as a result of that consultation, some amendments were introduced to Parliament last night as part of an omnibus bill for debate. And what I can say in terms of some of the amendments that I'm in agreement with is that where we were concerned in the last time we spoke regarding how victim survivors of sexual violence could be gagged from self-identifying and potentially face the risk of being fined or imprisoned if they didn't go through a court process to get permission to use their own name. This amendment to that Act, which was introduced to Parliament last night, was stating that now adult victim survivors will not face that as something that they would have to deal with. In fact, they will have a lot more control over how their voice is heard. So if, for example, a media outlet wishes to report on the sexual violence that they've experienced, as long as media have obtained written consent, then the victim survivor can then determine whether they just want their name told, they can determine whether they want their image used and what aspects of their story they want told. So they might not want certain gratuitous details included in a media report. For children victim survivors, they will still be included to have the agency to use their voice as well. However, if they're under the age of 18, there would be a few more checks and balances put in place to ensure that an adult, responsible person who can guide them through that process and help them make informed consent. But effectively, victim survivors will no longer face that risk of being gagged if they wish to speak. But on the other side, because this is a very complex area and there is diverse views, that there are also many victim survivors who don't want their stories told, that actually want to have the privacy. That for them is empowering, whereas for others it's empowering to be able to speak out. So you need to be able to protect everyone.
I understand that, but in our attempts sometimes to protect people and do the right thing, there's fallout. And you've touched on some of it with me before we started the interview. And one of the things that you mentioned is that we may well have to not rewrite, but delete some information. Now that is very difficult in this incredibly complicated world of ours, which is digital, and information is everywhere if only you want to look for it.
So what that was in regards to is a different aspect of the Omnibus bill that was introduced for debate last night, which is actually the Justice Legislation Amendment Bill. And what that is in reference to is in regards to deceased victims of sexual violence. And once again, the intention of this was actually not a harmful intention. Was seeking to protect the family members who don't potentially want the details of their loved ones out there.
We understand the media has a tendency every anniversary, every year, to change, to create a story out of nothing. It might be a slow news day and the anniversary of some horrific act has occurred and they want to run a special. This would actually come in there and put the onus very much back on the media organisation to approach the families involved to try and get their support. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to go near it. Is that right?
Well, when you're talking about unintended, that's the idea, but the unintended consequence as things stand, which is what's caused so much debate right now, is that what this could mean as things stand is that media outlets could face fines of up to $8,261 per individual offence. And for grieving relatives, they could face fines of up to $3,304 or 4 months jail for referring to their own deceased loved one. And what also would mean, as one of the aspects of this, is that people who have reported on this, people who've mentioned this on their social media pages, who have set up GoFundMes, that potentially all of that has to be removed online, those references. What we don't want to see, and what potentially could happen out of this, is that we can only seek to, in the future, refer to deceased victims of sexual violence by attaching them to the name of their perpetrator. So, for example, if we look in the case of Jill Meagher, no one wants to be
reminded about Bailey.
Yeah, by saying Adrian Bailey's victim. No one wants that. And look, I look at these names that we're also familiar with: Jill Meagher, Eurydice Dixon, Aya Moussaoui, Tracy Connolly, Courtney Heron, and every single one of those women whose lives have been taken has had such an immense impact on me. Like, I literally lived around the corner from Jill Meagher where she was raped and murdered, and when that happened. And honestly, like, these are people who they should never have had their lives ended in the way that happened. But what happened as a result of those murders is it galvanised our community, and it shone a light on the absolute awful level of male violence against women that we have here in Australia. And
also the legal system to protect them. And also the legal system, because if we remember this horrific case that you're referring to, he was out on bail.
Absolutely.
That was something that needed to be reviewed, and in truth, he should never have been out. Now, had the court or the system done its job, then Jill Meagher would be alive today. And that's the horror of the whole story, isn't it?
Yeah, and this is the thing that, as a community, we have all been impacted by this, but who has been impacted the most are the family members.
Correct.
And this is where Minister for Victim Support, Natalie Hutchins, made the point in the parliamentary debate last night that we can't play politics with victims' lives. And it's really important that living victims of sexual violence, but then also the family members of deceased victims, get to determine how and when their stories are told. And this is why it is so important that thorough consultation with the impacted family members should be happening before any legislation is passed. So the outcome of last night, and obviously there's a lot of different sides to this issue. Everyone agrees.
Imagine. So are there recommendations that have been made, and how long before this particular proposal becomes law?
Well, at this point in time, the debate has been adjourned.
Right.
And what I would be hoping at this point is that further consultation will happen.
Great.
Because we don't want to end up in a world where we're referring to Adrian Bailey's victim.
I totally agree. Can you promise us that you'll come back, and as the situation advances, and as we find out more about the proposed new laws, that you give us an update?
Absolutely. And the other point I also like to make here too is that when I came on last time and I was speaking in regards to the Judicial Proceedings Reforms Act, unfortunately that led to me being incredibly targeted and experiencing some cyberbullying behaviour. And this is one of also the unintended consequences of what's going on, because this is now actually causing division within our survivor advocate community. And something that I'd really like to put out there to my peers and to the broader public is, this is not about having an oppression Olympics.
No.
Everyone's voice matters.
Correct.
No one's experience of trauma is more or less valid than anyone else's. And when we are seeking to challenge being gagged by laws and systems and things like that, we shouldn't be gagging each other, because we have enough that we've gone through and survived, and we have enough that is challenging us on a systemic level, that we shouldn't be turning on each other. And we need to support each other through this process.
Well, we'll continue to support you, Cathy Oddie, because you've been enormous and immense for us, giving us insight and enormous detail about some horrific things that have gone on and should not go on, should cease and desist. And let's see if we can get these proposals across the line to help the greater majority. And of course, in every legal aspect, there will always be the individual that will be affected, but let's hope that's kept to an absolute minimum. Cathy Oddie,
yes,
as always, thank you for joining us in The Informer.
Thank you for having me, George.